And I'll just introduce myself again. I'm Sarah Vaya. I'm a professor at University of Maryland. And today we're talking about regenerative landscaping, making suburban landscapes part of the climate and biodiversity solution. So I'm very pleased to have all of you here. I'm super excited about it. And let's get going. Okay. All good teachers have an outline. So what we're going to be talking about today is shown here on this slide. First, I want to discuss the problems with our current approach to landscaping, which pretty much are exemplified here. And that is that our current approach to landscaping totally revolves around the lawn. I want to discuss a number of ways that we can reduce the impact of lawn, including simply accepting imperfection. We can remove the lawn and replace it with native plants. We can widen or add beds around the perimeter of our property. Well, you can see here, these people could be planting a lot of good stuff here around the edges of their property, but they're not. And these are enormous houses, right? So this is very, expensive subdevelopment, but there are no plants except for lawn. All right, so we can widen and add beds, and that then shrinks the lawn. Or finally, we could plant a climate-friendly lawn substitute. So it would look like lawn, but it isn't actually going to have some of the problems of lawn. And finally, I just want to end briefly with a few tips for increasing the sustainability of your yard. And we'll just get started with the sort of ground truth, which is that lawn is currently the default landscape that I think definitely in our country. Here's what we have here. Grass, grass, grass. All right. The ideal home typically includes this big expanse of manicured lawn. Some of you have seen this great picture from Ryan Homes, their advertisement for their new homes, which is here is the home in this idyllic landscape of all lawn. Little rainbow over here, it looks really great. This is what your life will be like if you buy a Ryan home. But the truth of the matter is, it really doesn't matter whether the home is huge or very modest in a little suburb like this. It's still all lawn. And in this case, you can also see these folks have cut this way too short because it's drying out. If you're driving around your neighborhood now, I'm in Maryland, of course, and I know a lot of you are also in Maryland. It's been really hot and dry, and so all the people who are cutting their lawn too short, you can see it. It's all brown and these little brownie stripes like this. Anyway, we have a long history in our country of lawn as a symbol of wealth and home ownership. So it's like, okay, I am doing so well, I can afford to have this, empty landscape, which produces no food, no fiber, nothing. I'm not grazing anything on it. It's just basically there. And that for, years has been sort of the idea that this conveys that I'm doing really well. The colonists from England mostly or Europe brought over to the U.S. the idea of lawn, big British lawns around their homes, and little lawns around regular British people's homes. Britain is a fairly cool environment, and so the colonists brought over, I think, really the idea that they would use cool weather grasses. And that causes a lot of trouble here because it's not always cool, and cool weather grasses can be very hard to grow in certain areas. Lawn is great because it requires almost no thought to choose and install because everybody's used to it. The upkeep is very familiar. I grew up in the suburbs, in a little house, I think on less than a quarter-acre lot. And I remember my dad out with a little push mower, mowing the grass all the time, and everyone else in the neighborhood. Not very many people then. Okay, I was born in 1951, right? So I grew up in the 50s. Not many people had these big giant lawnmowers that made a lot of noise. But anyway, so most of us who grew up in the suburbs are used to, lawn care. But if you don't want to do it yourself, you can always find somebody to do it for you. A lot of people, do that now. when you drive around, it's easily seen that lawn is the most common, not just residential landscape, but also municipal and commercial. But lawn, aside from these very familiar features, lawn has a huge dark side because it has big environmental and economic impacts. Okay, so I'll talk about the environmental cost of lawn. There's somewhere between 42 and 50 million acres of lawn in the US, and that makes it our largest irrigated crop. It's more acres of lawn than corn or soybeans, okay? So it's, really a huge feature of the country. There's 1.3 million acres of lawn in Maryland. There's 1.28 million acres of cropland. Same amount of lawn as cropland. That doesn't make any sense because nobody's getting anything out of that lawn. Lawn uses between 30 and 50% of all residential water, and this shakes down to between 7 and 9 billion gallons of fresh water a day. Fresh water is a very limited resource, and it's becoming even more limited. And so to spend our limited fresh water supply on lawn is, well, you just got to ask whether that's really worth it. When I go to campus, sometimes this isn't a picture of campus, and I'm not dumping on the Maryland campus because it's beautiful, but sometimes they forget to turn off the sprinklers during the day. A lot of places run these, in-ground sprinklers during the day when the sun is shining and it just evaporates a lot of the water. And a lot of times overusing these, the ground becomes saturated and you start to see you can see a little water here in the gutter running down to the storm drain. Okay, now that's definitely not a good use of the water because it's just going down, to the groundwater. In addition to all this water use, lawn mowing uses between 600 and 800 million gallons of gas a year. 17 million gallons of fuel is spilled each year, and this is an old number, so I'm sure it's even more than that now. It's not that hard to spill a little gasoline every time you fill up your lawnmower. Lawn like this is a monoculture of introduced species, and when it's planted in this way, with maybe a few little shrubs somewhere at the edge of the lawn, there's very little habitat for birds or insects other than lawn grubs, right? So this is not helping us with biodiversity. Mowers now emit as much air, that means modern four-cycle mowers, okay, emit as much air pollution as 11 cars, so hour for hour. A riding mower emits as much as 34 cars. Now, switching to electric mowers will solve, the air emissions problem, but it doesn't do anything for the water and the biodiversity problem or the problems with the chemicals and pesticides, which I'll discuss right now. In a moment. So yard equipment pollutes the air, and in fact, yard tools cause 5% of all US carbon emissions, which of course is contributing to climate change. These two pictures are from the California Air Resources Board. There are 13.7 million passenger vehicles in California. And, I think of California as a place where everyone is driving around all the time. Everyone around here is driving around all the time too, it seems like. But anyway, 13.7 million passenger vehicles, 13.4 million yard tools. So, for each person who has a car, they can carry around a yard tool. But when it comes to the comparison between cars and yard tools, car emissions are regulated, okay? And so they're declining. Yard tool emissions, not so much, right? And so, in fact, as here we are, I think this was made in 2020. In California, they just projected the emissions from yard tools to increase over time as the emissions from cars decline. So here's another figure from the California people. 1 hour of lawnmower use is like driving 300 miles from LA to Vegas in a Toyota Camry. 1 hour of leaf blower use, this is why I have the sort of big X here, is like driving 1,100 miles, okay, from LA to Denver. And also I read an interesting feature, which is that leaf blowers blow around a lot of dust. They kick a lot of dust up into the air, and some of that, if it's from wet leaves or something like that, it is not going to be very healthy to breathe. And in addition to the mower and the leaf blowers, there's edgers and weed whackers. We probably need a weed whacker a little bit, but I've never really understood why you might need an edger. I don't think we really need leaf blowers, okay? I'm not going to get into that argument now. But then all these yard tools also make a ton of noise. So, there's that. Now, chemicals. Lawn fertilizers and chemicals are, polluting our air and water like crazy. And they're also not that great for our health. They're actually very bad. The pesticides and fungicides are very bad for our health. Between 60 and 90 million pounds of synthetic nitrogen fertilizer is applied to lawns each year. And to make this fertilizer, requires very high temperatures, usually from natural gas. And manufacturing alone produces 4 to 5 tons of carbon dioxide emissions per ton of fertilizer. So before you've even put the fertilizer on your lawn, you've already bought into a lot of carbon emissions just in the manufacturing. Then much of the fertilizer runs off as nitrate, NO3, that's soluble in water. So it runs right off and goes into our waterways and pollutes them. Or it's emitted as nitrous oxide, N2O, nitrous oxide, which is a potent greenhouse gas, over 300 times as potent as carbon dioxide. So it really does a number in the atmosphere. And then to make things even worse, nitrous oxide emissions increase exponentially, so faster than linear, right, on a curve, when plants can't take up any more fertilizer, okay? So often, okay, we know that there's 10 times more nitrogen and chemical runoff from lawns per acre than from farms, right? Which means that a lot of homeowners are applying way too much fertilizer, okay? And so that increases nitrous oxide emissions. Very bad for the climate. Okay, between 67 and 80 million pounds of pesticides are applied each year. And most of these pesticides have dangerous health impacts for adults, kids, and pets. And there are a variety of horror stories on the web and in articles that I read. I didn't want to talk about too many of those, but articles indicating that these chemicals are making our kids and our pets sick. One example, a clear example, is weed and feed stuff, which is it contains 2,4-D. That's for those of you who are as old as me, who were in college during the Vietnam War. This is the 2,4-D is the component in Agent Orange, which is very, very hazardous. And yet, hey, you can buy it at Home Depot. When you go into Home Depot or Lowe's, there's just a lot of real estate devoted to fertilizer and chemicals for your lawn. Oh, there's Weed Be Gone right now. Okay, anyway, millions of American families plus over 850,000 lawn workers are exposed to these toxic pesticides every year. And I just have to ask, for what? We're not putting them on there so that we can produce food. We're just putting them on there so we have this perfect green lawn in the backyard. And, I may have told some of you before, my mom had a perfect lawn, totally perfect. I could never understand it. It was like a toxic wasteland out there. Anyway, so all this nitrogen chemical runoff is coming from lawns, and it's not doing really anything. Now, why does lawn need so much maintenance? Okay, here's a wonderful picture. There's a lot of different versions of this. This was originally published in a paper in 1995. It's been redrawn by, or reinterpreted by many people. This is a nice color version. Here's the ground level, of course. Here's above ground, below ground. Here's the above ground and below ground picture of lawn. Okay, this is, I think, Kentucky bluegrass. And so, it's got it's a foot down here. So, it's got, a couple inches of roots, maybe. And then, a little bit of above ground. So this is lawn. So when you compare that to these native plants, okay, especially some of the grasses like Indian grass, big, dense root mass. Some of these plants, lead plant, compass plant, I don't believe I've ever seen either of those, but they can have roots going down 13 or 14 feet. Okay, but all of the native plants have roots. I mean, here's purple coneflower. That's like the sort of skimpiest root system. It still goes down 5 feet. This is why these plants are able to get water and nutrients. They've got a big mycorrhizal, fungal association. If for those of you who came to the soil webinar, and so they contribute a lot of organic matter to the soil. They really help build healthy soil. This, no, it doesn't, because there's very little root material. This supports almost no soil microbes. So the deep roots of native plants feed those soil microbes, which we know are very essential for healthy soil, for purifying the water. They add organic material to the soil. When the roots die, they add extra organic matter there, and they provide adequate water and nutrients for the plants. So if you have native plants in your yard, you don't need to water them, except maybe the first year or if you plant a transplant. Okay. Now, the economic cost of residential lawn. I've given a lot of in-person talks about this, and I often ask audiences, well, when was the last time you actually thought about how much it costs you to keep your lawn in shape? And almost no one can answer, oh, hey, last week I thought about it. I mean, people don't really think about this. It's like, hey, I have the lawn, I got to take care of it. If you mow the lawn yourself, this is a little bit, I think this is 5 or 6 years old. I got this off the web. You've got to buy equipment. I don't know where you can buy a John Deere riding lawnmower for $1,500, but anyway, you got to buy the equipment to do it. You got to maintain the equipment, either take it to a place to maintain it or maintain it yourself. That's going to cost some money, maybe take some time. Plus, you're going to buy fertilizer, herbicides, insecticides, fungicides. I mean, if you're really a lawn person, you do all this stuff, right? You have to buy gas, and the average American spends between 70 and 100 hours per year taking care of their lawn. That is a huge time commitment. Okay, so that's if you do it yourself. That's the cheap end of the scale. If you use a lawn service, and I got these numbers recently off of Angie's List, this is for the whole US. It costs $123 on average to mow. I think they consider the average size lawn about a third of an acre. Still, people have their lawn mowed every 2 weeks. This is, $450 a month. I would be hesitant to spend that amount of money, but well, that's me, right? You'll see what my yard looks like in just a second. And then there's all the other maintenance tasks. I was horrified to find out that edging costs between $2.50 and $11 per linear foot. So it can cost a lot of money to have your yard edged if you're into that. Weed abatement is going to cost something, fertilizing, and this is per time, right? Aerating, leaf removal, it can really cost a lot if you have the guys come and do the lawn chores for you. I asked my neighbor, or I commented to my neighbor that her lawn would be a little more healthy if the lawn guys didn't cut it so short and didn't cut it so often. They come every week all year. I mean, in all growing season, even now when it's not growing very much. And she told me that they wouldn't come if they couldn't come every week. So that made me feel kind of upset. Now, I was not aware until somewhat recently that people actually seek out the ability to mow a pattern into their lawn. Okay, this is actually a thing. There's like websites on this where you can go and find the patterns. I'm so dense, I was completely unaware of this. But if you have a pattern like this mowed into your lawn, it often means you have to go over the same area twice, right, at least. And that means more emissions, more time, more money for the company, and more soil compaction. The soil under lawns is often highly, highly compacted because there's, no roots really to keep the soil, sort of not all smashed together. So anyway, mowing per se isn't that great for the environment, but mowing a pattern into the lawn is even less great for the environment. Okay. It also costs, our county and other municipalities money to keep grass like this growing. And I'm not talking about in playing fields, because, you know, grass in playing fields is important and is not to be ripped up and replaced with artificial turf, which is what Howard County is doing in a number of places, which I find personally horrifying, since it's documented that artificial turf is extremely bad for the people who play on it, health-wise. A few years ago, when I was working on a grant with some Howard County people, I learned from the guys in the utility section that there's about 4,000 acres of mowed grass outside parks and playing fields in Howard County. Okay. And they contract this out to some lawn company, and they pay about $2,000 an acre for annual maintenance. This was in 2020. So this is $8 million that the county's spending to maintain their lawn. Plus, I don't think they do a lot of irrigating, but they probably put down fertilizer and some chemicals. So if there's a way to economically reduce lawn that the, you know, municipalities have to take care of, it would be, you know, economically better, and probably also a lot healthier. Certainly there'd be less carbon emissions. So given the environmental and economic costs of lawn, can we do better? And I already mentioned artificial turf. Better does not mean putting down artificial turf. Okay, can we do better? I think we can. We can rethink our suburban landscapes and embrace practices that first and foremost restore the soil, okay, with deep-rooted plants, et cetera. And when we embrace those practices, it will help with the other things, climate, water, and biodiversity issues. And we can do other things like mowing less often that reduce emissions, sequester carbon, and that will help with the climate. Restoring the soil will go a long way to improving the water situation, but also putting on less fertilizer, et cetera. We want to increase infiltration, reduce flooding, boost water holding, and improve water purification. And again, that's not going to happen in soil where you have, you know, 1 inch of roots and then a lot of compacted soil. But it will happen in soil where you have more deep-rooted plants. So that's the water problem. And then, of course, there's preserving and adding habitat that can help us to rebuild bird and insect populations. That's going to help with biodiversity. So how do we do these things? Reduce the amount of lawn we have in our home landscapes and increase the number of native perennials, trees, shrubs, and, you know, showy flowers. Okay, so approaches to reducing lawn impact. The first approach is accept imperfection. This is my backyard. It's sort of laughable. This is in its beautiful season when the violets are blooming. I've planted a variety of different kinds of grass back here and done various experiments and whatnot. There's a lot of clover in here right now, which is, you know, feeding the soil by fixing nitrogen. But I think, you know, I know my mother, as I've already described, was really big on perfect lawn, would have been horrified by this. Okay. To me, it's a place where I can go out and play with the dog and run around, and it's open, and, you know, I like it. I was delighted to read a description of this approach accept imperfection. It doesn't mean this, okay? It just means stop using fertilizer and chemicals, et cetera. The description was the freedom lawn. The freedom lawn, I'm into that, right? I'm not a slave to my lawn because I want it to be green, but I don't really care if it's all perfect, you know, the same kind of grass and the same length. Okay. Not everybody agrees with me. Accept imperfection involves stop using fertilizer and chemicals. Okay. Mow high 4 to 5 inches with a mulching mower. So you return the cut off grass to the scene where it can decompose and add nutrients. Don't irrigate. Okay. Let the lawn, except if you've planted a new lawn and you have to irrigate. Let the lawn go dormant in the summer when it's hot. The roots will grow deeper, and that'll help the lawn out a little bit. They're never going to grow very deep, but if you water the lawn an inch, what was it? I read something shocking, an inch a week, an inch a month. I think it's the inch a week in the warm season. The roots don't grow deeper, but if you don't water during the dormant season, and you don't water very much anyway, the roots will grow deeper. So my motto is, if it's green, mow it, but don't mow it any more than I absolutely have to. Now, this approach, so there's a wide range of acceptability within this, right? You can do more or less depending on how much you feel you have to have, how beautiful you have to have it. So this approach also works with all the other approaches while you're sort of shrinking the amount of lawn that you have in the yard. All right, the second approach, remove the lawn. Just get rid of the lawn entirely, replace it with native plants and paths and whatnot. This can be totally spectacular. And it's great for experienced gardeners, but it can be scary for less committed people who want to be responsible. They want to be, climate friendly, do the right thing, but they can't quite get their minds or their budgets around getting rid of all the grass. Now, these two pictures were provided to me by a woman, Ingrid Blanton, who may even be on the webinar. I don't know. This was a few years ago. I gave a talk. I think she's from Easton or around in that neck of the woods somewhere. She took out all the lawn in her back and replaced it with, beautiful beds. And, this is a micro clover pathway. She got a nice patio. It looks like that was there before, and some potted plants. Really very incredibly beautiful. And it was a ton of work, I know. And so I have tremendous respect and appreciation for that. Not everybody can pull that off. And I know there are a lot of master gardeners on this webinar. I don't think it's helpful to try to tell people that they need to get rid of their lawn, because I think that makes them feel bad, and your average person probably really can't manage something as wonderful as this. Also, getting rid of lawn completely is not going to work in large scale or municipal landscapes, because it's just too, it's kind of a little too much, and you have to have clean sight lines and roadways and whatnot. Okay, so the next approach, and I'm going to spend quite a bit of time on this because this is, I think, a very important and productive approach. And that is to widen the beds, planting trees, shrubs, and perennials around the perimeter, and also adding paths or a patio. So here's two panels from a great presentation from a landscape architect. And so here's a sort of basic cartoon of a house. With the house, there's a little planting in the front along the foundation. There's a little token shrub here and a few trees around the edge. We can start around the edge and plant more trees, hopefully native trees, that will, help to shade the neighborhood, shade the house in some cases. Some of these are pretty far from the house to provide a lot of shade, but and then build the beds out away from those trees and shrubs. Okay, so this is something, and you can build some more beds in the front, etc. So this is really a totally different thing from this. This is provides a lot more scope for deep-rooted plants, and it reduces the lawn a lot, while still leaving enough to run around with the pets and the kids and everything, play games and whatnot. So nobody's saying you need to make your whole yard like a forest, but you probably don't need this either. Okay, so many native shrubs have berries for wildlife. Oh, I took that berry picture out, but it's in one of the next slides. This is a pair of pictures that's from one of the books I read and will recommend. The burning bush here has been in the past, especially, a very popular landscape shrub. It's invasive. It spreads into woodlands and does not very good things, but it's very beautiful in the fall because it has red foliage. So Reed and Stibbolt in their book suggest, why not try blueberry? Blueberries have very pretty red foliage in the fall, and there's no reason why you can't put some blueberry bushes right there in your around the edge of your property in a landscape bed. Put them where there's a little bit of sun, and you've got a nice display without having an invasive plant. You can widen the beds gradually, okay? You don't have to like rip up the whole thing at once and have it be a big production. Yard work is a lot of work, okay? Everybody knows that. So just do a little bit at a time. Do whatever you can. If you have helpers, do more. If you don't have helpers, take it allow it to take a little bit longer. But it doesn't have to disrupt your whole, property because you're not ripping a bunch of stuff up. And another thing I want to stress is that the plantings don't need to be real complicated. Um, I looked at a lot of books, and I have to tell you that some of the books have these beautiful yards and beautiful plantings, but I just get this like stressed out feeling when I look at these pictures because they're so complicated, and I feel like I could never make that happen in my yard. Whereas something like this, where you've got a couple of different kinds of plants and there are a lot of them together, right, big groupings, this to me is more manageable. This was included in the book, not because of what I just said, but because the salvia is self-seeding. And, the guy who wrote the book raises the question, well, you're going to, take out the one so you keep the groupings, or you're just going to let it go. And I mean, the point is, if they're self-seeding and spreading, then everything just gets sort of mixed up in the future, and it probably will still look really nice. Here's a nice picture where there's beds with some little plantings, and there's some shrubs, and a new tree here. This maybe looks like a little swale to I don't know which direction the water is going in, but they've got a path and a patio. So you can fill up your yard with paths and patios and these wider beds. And before you know it, you maybe have cut the lawn area in half. Okay, now while you're planting all those native trees and shrubs, it's really useful to landscape in ways that reduce your energy use. So those of you who are in Maryland, we have been really baking over the last few days, which I totally hate because I feel like I've been trapped in the house. But you can improve the energy efficiency of your house. So here's the house, right? Of your house tremendously by planting some trees on the west and south sides of the house. If you have a big wind coming from some direction, you can plant an evergreen wind barrier. You can plant some other trees that might provide shade from the morning sun. They point out here, even small trees, if you have window air conditioning units, might be able to shade those. It's very, very useful to have deciduous trees on the south and west side, because everybody remembers, right, the miracle of deciduous trees. In the summer, they've got their leaves, so they're shading the place. But in the winter, the leaves are gone, and so the winter sun can warm the house up. It's a miracle. Anyway, if you plant deciduous trees on the south and west side, you can save 20 to 40% on your cooling, and the leaves are off, so it doesn't really have any impact on your heating bill. It's really useful if you can shade your air conditioning unit or your heat pump in the summer. I used to have a beach umbrella set up by to shade my heat pump. Somehow that fell down and I forgot to put it back up, but that's really helpful because, the heat pumps are trying to exchange the heat from the inside to the outside and get rid of the heat from the inside, dump it in the outside. And it's a lot harder to do that if the metal of the housing on the heat pump is broilingly hot from being in the sun. Planting shrubs around the foundation can also reduce heat loss, but of course you don't want to plant them real close. You want to give a little bit of space there. Okay, so you can do a lot for your energy bills with some landscaping. Now, it's really useful, not just because native perennials have deep roots, but there are other advantages to perennials as opposed to annuals. So compared to traditional annuals, perennials save a lot of resources and time, and they reduce your carbon footprint. So here's a picture, again, from one of the books that I have been consulting with, a lot of flats of, beautiful annuals, lots of bright flowers. I mean, the great thing about annuals is they have all these bright flowers because they don't have to invest any energy in roots because they're not going to, make it through the winter anyway, right? So you can add a ton of color to your yard, all at once by buying a bunch of these. However, they're usually always in plastic flats, and they were planted in peat-based mix. And so neither of those things is very useful for the environment. And plus, you have to go out there and plant them every year, right? That's my big thing. I love perennials. It's like a miracle. There they are in the spring. They come up. I didn't have to do anything. So whereas this, you got to go to Home Depot or whatever and buy them and put them in. You got to dig, disturb the soil. Okay. Anyway, so native perennials are going to increase pollinators and increase biodiversity in your yard. I hope that some of you have been able to enjoy the fireflies. I've had a ton of fireflies in my yard, and I absolutely adore fireflies. They're sort of tapering off now. But I've got a lot of other stuff buzzing around, which is really fun. The deep-rooted perennials improve soil health. They help sequester carbon in the soil. I'm not going to talk much about carbon sequestration today. I'll talk about that more in the ag talk next time. And they help manage stormwater, which I'll talk about a little bit more later in the talk. And you can put these, native perennials in a lot of different places. Here's a beautiful planting in the front yard, a picture that was provided to me by a friend who's a landscape architect. And here's another nice example. This is from a book. When I have like the name of an author and the page, this is from one of the books that I will send you the details of all these books. This is a picture from Elvia Thompson, Annapolis Green. And she had a beautiful, I think this is their old office. I can't remember old or new, but she has a beautiful perennial garden that was certified as a pollinator garden. You can put, right out the front of a condo, a nice perennial garden. So, and here's another example. This is from a book about attracting natural enemies of insect pests, and you want to give them a lot of good plants to eat. So you can put these perennials anywhere. All right. And in Maryland, you don't have to stop in the backyard. Maryland stopped homeowner associations from requiring lawn in the front yard in 2021. Yay. And this is the work of Janet Crouch, who is a resident of the Beach Creek neighborhood in Howard County. And she put in this beautiful planting in her front yard, which to me is a huge asset. I think it's gorgeous. And one of the other people and neighbors complained to the HOA about this and about the native plants, and demanded that the front yard be returned to 100% turf grass. That makes no sense to me, but apparently it made a lot of sense to this person. One of our state delegates, Terry Hill from Howard, launched a legislation to, and this was passed, to prohibit homeowner associations from imposing, quote, restrictions on low impact landscaping. And that means, by restrictions, that means they can't make it more expensive, they can't make it less efficient, okay, and they can't require only turf grass. So plantings like this cannot be prohibited by homeowner associations. So if you are in a homeowner association and you are getting any backtalk, you can cite this law from 2021 and email me and I can provide you more information. I want to stress, this is not a no-mow law. You still have to, if you have grass in the front yard, you still have to mow it. This just means that you don't have to have only grass in the front yard. All right. Now, if you're going to, try to work with your neighbors and your homeowners association or your local government, it takes, a little time and persistence and some good strategy, because, well, I think that's self-evident. It's real important in a neighborhood to know what the rules are if you live in a homeowner association, and weigh your options for what they will allow you to do. As I said, they can't stop you from doing this, but you don't want to create a lot of ill will either. So share your vision and your design with neighbors. Make sure your yard fits in. You can do these things called cues to care, which means like put in a bird bath, or have a little border of mowed grass, or have a sign, something like that. Or, here's another, lawn with a bed there. Reach out to your board or your local government and talk to them about it. Start small or in the backyard until you're sure you can produce something that's going to look good. But above all, be enthusiastic, persistent, and stay positive. If you share with the neighborhood that it'll save a lot of money, it'll do this, it'll do that, then and present the benefits instead of just saying, you know, I want to do this new thing and too bad for you. I think that can really go a long way to keeping goodwill present. Now, what can you grow in these expanded beds of yours? Native grasses are always good. Here are 4 really great, I think, very beautiful native grasses. These 2 are bunch grasses that they grow in a clump. This is switchgrass and Indian grass. Both of these tall, 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 tall. And this picture is a little hard to see, but this is a winter picture of switchgrass where the seeds are very fine and they're really beautiful. And in the winter, if you leave the thing standing, they get frosted and they look really nice. River oats have a nice, interesting pattern. And this is one of my favorites, Virginia wild rye. Super easy to grow from seed. And if you just leave it's about 4 feet tall. Indian grass and switchgrass can be like 6 or 7 feet tall. It's about 4 feet tall. These turn brown, and these are called inflorescences. They're groups of seeds, and they're really beautiful. So I really like this plant a lot. You can also plant, you know, native perennials. A really good way to start is to make little beds around the trees if you have some trees in the middle of your yard, or you can put an edge along the property. And that also, you know, brings the beds out and reduces the amount of lawn. The other thing you can do is you can plant food in your landscape beds. I've got two books by a woman named Brie Arthur. She lives in North Carolina. And one is Gardening with Grains, and the other is Foodscape Revolution. She points out that when you mix fruit and veggies into landscape beds, it increases biodiversity and can boost pollination. And, you know, it also looks really beautiful. So she suggests make a nice, neat edge with herbs or garlic or peanuts. I don't know which one this is. It's neither herbs or garlic. And then behind that, she's got a mixture of, you know, various vegetables. And here's another picture of a mixture of vegetables and then a coleus or something in there. This is a picture from a book by, oh, I forgot her first name, Walliser, about attracting natural enemies. And here's a mixed sort of native perennial flowers and vegetables. And she points out that when you mix up your vegetables with your flowers and the landscape is a little more complicated, it gets the insect pests kind of confused and they are not able to as easily find your, say, zucchini or your squash to lay, the squash borers to find those and to lay eggs on them because there's so much other disruption in the landscape. Here's a nice apple tree in the sort of with a bed, and it looks like some zucchinis or something, but there's azaleas and some other stuff. You know, this is to me, it adds interest to have the fruit trees and the other things mixed in together. And this is an example in Brie Arthur's yard where she's used grains in place of ornamental grasses as sort of a feature in her yard, which I think is kind of cool. So you can mix it up with all kinds of edible trees and shrubs like blueberries, raspberries, hazelnuts, fruit trees, and kind of just mix things up so that you get a lot of pollinators and a lot of biodiversity action. Okay, and don't forget ground covers, especially native ground covers. Now, there's a lot of books about landscaping, etc. I just want to point out now while I'm thinking about it, they don't always just recommend native plants. So, you know, I've got a book about ground covers, and there's a lot of ground covers in there that aren't native, some of which are even sort of invasive and spreading. And so you have to be a little bit careful. I got all of these pictures, these 5 pictures from University of Maryland Home and Garden Information Center, and here's the link. So when you get the slide handout, these links will all be hot. You can go there and learn more about it. So moss phlox, green and gold, pussy toes, alum root. This is my favorite of all time, golden groundsel. It's one of the only ones that's evergreen. So the leaves are hanging out there in the winter looking good instead of dying back. This is native Pachysandra. It's Pachysandra procumbens or Allegheny spurge, it's sometimes called. the standard pachysandra people have in their yards is not native, but I've got some of this. It's really great. It spreads, not super fast, but it does spread. This spreads really well. So one of my faves. All right. Now, if you go to Home Depot or Lowe's, sometimes you can find various what's called cultivars of native plants. Now, cultivars are native plants. It started out with native plants, and plant breeders have taken, this is a columbine, native columbine, and through the miracle of plant breeding, this is not genetic engineering, this is regular plant breeding, they've, produced columbines with different colors, like yellow ones, okay? They produce columbines where instead of the flowers hanging down, they point up, or other features that differ, just slightly different, instead of red, pink, that differ from the native. Same thing here. This is a native Rudbeckia, and then there's a bunch of cultivars which differ. A native aster, and then a bunch of cultivars that differ. Now, it's well known that the native plants themselves support much more complex food webs than non-natives, but cultivars that have changes in key traits like color or the attitude of the flower are often much less attractive to native pollinators. And that's what this graph shows. Here's the columbine. Okay, so here's red columbine native. Okay, this is the number of pollinator visits per minute. So this is the native one. And then here are these, I think there's 4 cultivars. This is the yellow one there. And then these 2, which are more like the native than the others. And then this one, which has the flower pointing up, the pollinators didn't even, go there, basically. And the same thing for, I don't have pictures of foxglove, but here's the black-eyed Susan, the asters, and I think this is, I can't remember which aster this is, but the point is that for the black-eyed Susan, doesn't matter. The pollination is the same for all of them. But for the asters, it is, in fact, significantly better for pollinators, the native one, than the cultivar. So just word of the wise. If you go and you find, all these different showy-looking versions of native plants, be aware they may not perform in your landscape as well as the actual native ones, the wild type. And most of these, somebody paid a lot of money to breed these up, and so the companies usually want to sell them. They often have tags on them that say propagation unauthorized. This keeps the genetic diversity low, okay? Some of them may even be F1s, I don't know, which means the seeds aren't going to breed true. And this prevents you from dividing or growing these plants from seed, which you can do with the regular native plants. Okay, now, where are you going to get the native plants? You can purchase potted plants or plugs. Plugs come in these plug flats like this. This is what they look like if you pull them out of a little flat, from a native plant supplier. You can usually get some wild types from Home Depot, etc., but it's much better and safer to buy them from a native plant supplier. I really like plugs. It's much cheaper per plant. You can sometimes in some places get mixed flats like this. This is a sunny rain garden kit from a company which puts in a certain number of each kind of plant for a desired mixture. And that's great. But the plugs are definitely cheaper per plant. And they also require less disturbance of the soil or the environment than a 4 or 5 or 6 inch pot. Another way you can get native plants is to participate in a local seed or plant swap. A lot of communities have these, or if your community doesn't have one, you could organize one. Once you have a particular plant species in your yard, you can multiply it, right? As long as you haven't, purchased one of those cultivars that says you can't. There are different ways to multiply native plants. You can divide them. That just means basically going to a clump of plants and, digging them up and separating out the roots and then, moving part of it to another place. And there's a lot of information on the web about when and how and different species preferences for how to divide them. So here's a couple of good links for people. You can also grow your own plants from seed. Once you have native plants in your environment, say you have a bunch of coneflowers or which I've had great success with. The other one that came to mind was phlox. I haven't been able to germinate phlox seeds, but you can divide tall phlox really easily. You can grow your own plants from seed. Either you can buy the seeds from a reputable dealer, in which case you can try to get a local ecotype that is a native plant, which is actually not just native to the area, but which the actual population is native to our area. Or you can just collect seeds from your own plants, which I do a lot. All right, now growing native plants from seed. Once you've got the seeds, if you've collected them, they often have to have a little winter treatment. And to give them fake winter, you just put them in wet sand or vermiculite in a baggie in the fridge and leave them for at least 2 months. Or if you're me and you forget they're in there, you go back 14 months later and there they are in the baggie. I did that for a bag of purple coneflower, and boy, did they germinate just like a bomb. Every single one came up. I like to germinate plants in these 20-row seedling flats, because then if you don't get very good germination, like what happened here, right? Nothing came up. Sometimes I forget and skip a row, but you don't waste a lot of a whole pot worth of potting mix if they don't come up if you plant them in these 20-row flats. Then you transplant them. I put them into either 2-inch pots like this. So here's a flat of 2-inch pots, or 3-inch pots. The ones I have are a little deeper. So if I'm going to try to grow a bigger plant, then I would put them in there. Sometimes if I've bought plugs from a company, this is a sort of reused deep landscape plug flat. These are 5 inches deep. So the plugs are 5 inches deep, and it's in a little tray. These must be those purple, at least some of them are those purple coneflowers I was talking about. Then I've got these racks that are 4 feet wide, and you just go and get some LED shop lights or even regular shop lights. I put 3 sets of 2. Okay, each fixture has 2 lights, 3 sets of 2 on each shelf, and I can move them up and down because I've got them on like little chains. You can see over here there's little S hooks and chains. I move them up and down. So these are really low when the plants are first in there, and then when the plants get bigger, I move them up. That works great. Once you get this set up, then you can just use it for years. Okay, now, then you want to plant them outside. One of the big problems with native plants is that they often require a lot of weeding, okay? And that is difficult for people. It's frustrating if it's in your yard, or it can be very expensive if you have to hire somebody to do it. So I got involved again with some other people from Howard County in a Howard County Innovation Grant, where we tested the weed blocking ability of this horticultural paper called Weed Guard Plus, which you can get at a number of places. And what I did was we set up this was during the pandemic. I had to do it in my backyard. So I took part of this old pasture and converted it into this plots. And I grew up 500 plants from seed, which was kind of fun. We tested 3 things. One didn't work, so I won't even bore you with that. One was bare ground, and the other one was with the horticultural paper on there. Okay. And I used this awesome tool called a Pro Plugger, which you basically just stomp on, and it makes a nice, pulls out a little cylindrical tube of soil, which collects up in here. So you can stomp 10 times and make a row like this, and then dump it out, turn it over and dump it out. It's awesome. No crouching. I hate to crouch. And so this is the bare ground one. And then for the paper, I just put the paper over there and then cut holes over top of each one of the places where I took the soil out. So I planted these up, and here it is after a couple of weeks, and then here it is later when the plants had grown up. So what happened? Here's the bare ground treatment. This is after, I forgot to put, this is 4 weeks after this. This is maybe around 2 weeks after I put the plants in. This is a total mess. It took me 2 hours and 20 minutes to weed a 6 square foot bed. 4 weeks later, it looked like this. But with the paper, you can see is the paper stops the weeds from growing in between the plants. So the only place the weeds can come up is right there around the plants. So it only took me 45 minutes to weed this one. Okay. 4 weeks later, the canopy is closing and the weeds aren't growing anyway. Here, I figured out what are these big gaps. I'm thinking, what happened there? I realized I couldn't distinguish the native grasses from the pasture grass, and so I just pulled up everything that looked like grass, and that's why there's these things here. But if you plant the plants close enough, this is too close for like even a plug. But if you plant them maybe plugs maybe like 8 inches apart, 6 to 8 inches apart, they fill in really fast, and that'll keep the weeds down. So that's really useful. Okay. You can also, if you plant plugs, you can just use leaf mulch around the plugs, but you have to have a good source of leaf mulch for that. All right. Now, the last approach to reducing lawn impact. Find a climate-friendly substitute for whatever lawn you have left after you have made the beds. I call this the lawn mimic, and it's a mix of low and slow growing grasses. And these are in the group fine fescues. Regular lawn grass is tall fescue. And you can include optionally, microclover or white clover. If you include one of these, then that will fix nitrogen, take nitrogen from the air and turn it into plant fertilizer. And so, there's no need for fertilizer. You really don't need to fertilize this stuff anyway, but it looks particularly beautiful if you have some nitrogen fixing plants mixed in there with it. This is David Alexander's backyard. Some of you have seen this picture before. David came to one of my talks and decided he wanted to try this in his yard. This is the most beautiful incarnation of this I've ever seen. He's mixed it. There's the fine fescues there. He's mixed it with some white clover. The white clover is pretty aggressive, microclover or white clover, either one. And so you don't want to put too much in there. This is a really nice area of the clover that he used as a bed next to the street. Okay, so he was able to put in this great nitrogen fixing plant. This is along my driveway where I planted it in this mix of fine fescues one year. And it came up and looked really great until now. It's been taken over by the Japanese stiltgrass, which I recently learned is allelopathic. That is, it puts poisonous chemicals out the roots to kill other plants. So it's sinister. Anyway, this is when it's mowed about 5 inches. This is when I let it grow. It flops over, which I don't mind this as a way for it to look, but the fine fescue does build up a lot of thatch. And so if you let it flop over like this, at least in Maryland, it doesn't work very well. So fine fescues, to me, look like regular lawn, but you don't have to use any fertilizers or chemicals. There's only 10 to 30% as much mowing because it grows so slow. And if you let it flop over, you only have to mow it a few times. Some people mow only once a year. This is a picture from one of the books I read. That's the same stuff as this, basically, flopped over. They only mow it once a year. That's great. I had too much thatch in there for that. You really have to really build up a lot of thatch. Anyway, no, you can't mow these fine fescues in the summer because they dry up and die. So you mow them a few times in the spring and the fall. That's pretty much it. So it saves time. Plus, there's between 70 and 90% less carbon emissions. So the fine fescues has slightly deeper roots than the regular fescues, but the big climate benefit is less mowing. Okay. Here's the scenario for the trials I did. I tried a bunch of different mixes of the 4 main kinds of fine fescues: hard fescue, sheep fescue, red fescue, and creeping red fescue. I had different mixes. Here they are growing in separate plots. Here's another plant that I tried. It turns out all the mixes did great. And so that made things pretty easy. I planted this in November 2020. In the following May, they looked great. Following September, they still look great. I still have those plots out there. This is what they look like in March of this year. There's a lot of thatch under there, but they stay green during the winter just surprisingly green. Okay, it's best if you plant this stuff in the fall, and you have to prepare the ground at least a little bit by tilling or herbiciding. That's to get rid of the lawn, or you can just cut the lawn really low and core aerate to sort of scuff up some places for the seeds to land, and that works okay. You might need to overseed in the following spring or fall. That's probably a good plan, but definitely plant in the fall, not in the spring. all the types, all four types did well in both sun and shade, which was completely contrary to everything I read in the lawn literature, where they have this, it's myth to me that I think hard fescue is the only one that grows in the sun. The rest of them only grow in the shade. They all grow in the sun. Um, again, I said no mowing in the summer, every 4 weeks, spring and fall, and it needs dethatching. So I love this stuff. All right. What else can you put in the grassy places? Well, you can just plant clover, white clover, or a mixture. This is white and red clover, it looks like. You can let other species come in, like the violets that came in my yard. You can let weeds that aren't invasive come in if that doesn't, go against your core beliefs. Um, People in the UK plant what they call tapestry lawns. This is a picture of one of those. It's a mix of ground covers. This looked kind of complicated to me. Um, or you can plant sedges. This is the genus Carex. And there's a recent study and report from the Mount Cuba garden, which is over in Delaware, and they grew a bunch of these sedges in their greenhouses over the winter. Not, I think these are like high tones. But the thing about the Carexes is you can mow them. Here's a picture of some that are mowed. It's what they look like when they're clumps, and then they mow. Um, uh, but you got to start out with plugs, and they don't. I bought some sedges, and they don't spread very fast, and so you really got to be on top of it and keep the weeds out of there. So I'd be willing to try it only if I had a lot more time and a really tiny lawn. But I don't want to put a damper on it. If you want to read the report, then that would be great. Okay, now what about establishing a meadow in your yard? Well, it turns out that to establish a meadow like this is, in my opinion, not for the beginner, okay? Because it requires major, major site prep. The key to establishing a meadow is get rid of all the weeds before you plant. And that means tilling like 3 times the year before. You got to start the whole year before, tilling or herbiciding several times to get rid of the seeds. And then if you're just in your yard and you scatter out a bunch of seeds, you don't know what's going to germinate. If you didn't get rid of the weeds, you're going to have a lot of weeds, and you can't tell the weeds from the good stuff. And finally, you have to mow these meadows at increasing heights, like 6 inches the first year, but then maybe 12 inches the second year. So most people's mowers don't do that. This is a special seeder for the very lightweight native plant seeds. So for regular people, I think if you're going to do this in your yard, you would want to use plants or plugs, and you can control the composition that way. Actual meadows are 40% grasses and 60% what they call forbs, which means perennial plants with the showy flowers. And while they're growing and spreading, you got to mulch between the plugs or use the paper. Okay, so the next step, here's the beds, right? You now made the beds around, you expanded those, got a little bit of lawn. Then you work with your neighbors. There are a lot of subdevelopments in Maryland, at least. I know some in Howard County where there's no fences. Nobody has any fences. And so you could actually just work with your neighbors and, plant even more trees that would give a nice little forest. And this is super for biodiversity and for water management. So that's the next step. Let's talk a little bit. I'm running out of time here. Let's talk about community and municipal settings. Just like your yard, it really is so much more time and resource effective not to plant annuals like this. I mean, this looks really nice, all these begonias, but somebody had to go buy them and put them in, and it's very time consuming and expensive, and a lot of plastic and a lot of soil is mixed, etc. So it's much better if you just put in perennials. And also native perennials will increase biodiversity and pollinators. A lot of these annuals will draw in pollinators, but they're not going to really give a very big boost to the food web. This is a picture from one of the books that I will share with you, which I think looks fantastic. This is a really beautiful municipal bed where, again, it's not all that complicated. They've just got a few different kinds of plants, but they plant big clumps of them. So this seems pretty easy for me to imagine actually doing. This is a little bed near a ferry terminal, I think. Here's one in a park. I like this scenario a lot. down the middle of a boulevard because this is going to help manage the stormwater. You know, if you look down the grass in between the lanes or the directions of traffic, it's usually sloped down because that is for stormwater. And the great thing is if you funnel the water right down to a big bed of native plants like this, that's going to really help purify the water and give the municipal water treatment a big boost. All right. So there's climate and watershed benefits, as I've just alluded. Here's another nice area where they're directing water down into a swale down between the lines of traffic. Here's a nice cul-de-sac. Again, the curb is such that water from the street can go down in here and be and water these plants and also be purified. Here's a nice like office park setting. I'd love to see more office parks like this. This is that little strip between the sidewalk and the road called the Hell Strip. I never knew that because my mother always called it the parking. She would never use the word Hell Strip, which they call it the Hell Strip because it's dry and so inhospitable to all plants. But if you can plant some native plants in there, then they will improve the soil and help you sort of deal with water if the curbs are broken so the water can run in there. Okay. It's really, really useful to put native plants around catchment basins in suburbs like this. This is from a book on meadows by Zimmerman. And she described how planting this native meadow here to really helped out the catchment pond. Here you're getting all this algal growth from a bunch of fertilizer runoff that's filtered by these plants. And so the pond was a lot nicer afterwards. But to reduce even the need for these ponds, here's another Hell Strip picture. Funnel the water down in here off of the road and or in the community have a swale that goes down between the rows of houses where water can drain down and then it doesn't have to drain into a catchment pond. Okay, I'm going to let you read some of these on your own, but it's really important around your house to direct the water away from the house so it doesn't just go down and drip down the foundation and then make your basement wet. So you can dig a swale, which is like a depression, and direct the water away from the house. You can put some rocks on there so that the water goes down into a little depressed area where you can have a rain garden. Here's another one. Water is directed away from the house into here. There's another one. Water is directed. You can see it in here. So you wind up with a dry basement and a beautiful perennial bed. This is another picture from this. This is a great website, 10th Acre Farm. The woman who owns this does amazing things, and literally it is like a 10th acre. She has this little tiny plot and grows all these cool plants. But she made a trench for a swale and then a berm, and she planted plants on the berm and put a pathway in. Really nice. And don't forget the pervious pavement, which I think is awesome. And so that the stormwater can soak in your driveway. All right. A lot of people have streams that go through their backyards and they mow right up to the edge. And you can see the, negligible amount of roots from the turf grass are not capable of holding this stream border. But if you plant, this is a Virginia wild rye. If you plant a native plant, then actually you can, those roots will hold the storm bank and prevent the stream bank and prevent the stream from eating your yard. So you can look up this article from NC State if you're interested in that. Okay, we're closing in on the end here. I appreciate your patience. These 8 actions comes from a paper in Proceedings in the National Academy, co-authored in part by people from my department, the entomology department at Maryland. And these are easy things to do. So we've already talked about converting lawns into diverse habitats, grow native plants, reduce pesticide and herbicide use. If you have stuff like paths, you can try vinegar to kill the little seedlings in the paths. But ground covers and mulch and beds, Now, this is important. Limit the use of exterior lighting. If you have to have some exterior lights, like a front porch light or a light on your garage, use an amber light. I used to have white lights, and then I switched to yellow, and then I switched to amber. And the amount of insect carnage around those lights has visibly decreased. So I can really testify that the amber lights help. And capital purple, these aren't capital letters, but purple letters, big purple letters. Avoid bug zappers and mosquito spraying. If you, I think I said in one of my newsletters, it does not do very much good to spray for mosquitoes because you have to get every single adult mosquito to make any difference because they lay so many eggs. All you do is kill everything else if you spray for mosquitoes. Ditto bug zappers. You kill everything else, all the good bugs, so you don't want to do that. Uh, it's much better. Actually, I deployed my Doug Tallamy bucket of mosquito doom, and it's caught a lot of mosquito larvae already, which I've already killed off one cycle with the mosquito bit. So I'll repeat that in another newsletter. Okay, 5 through 8. If you wash your car in your driveway, try not to use very much soap because it just washes down and goes into the streams. Reduce the use of driveway sealants, which are petrochemical products, and de-icing salts in your driveway, also not very friendly. Then in your neighborhood, try to help people not have negative perceptions of insects. A very small fraction of insects are annoying or dangerous. Most insects are just totally cool and useful, like dung beetles, right? Or bees. These are various pollinators. So most insects are not a problem, and so it's really important not to let people have these sort of anti-insect attitude. And part of that is to become an educator and an advocate for insect and plant conservation. And this is a very important year for this, to get involved in local politics, support science. I read to my horror that popular support for scientists is waning as disinformation grows. That's kind of a big problem, and always very important to vote. Okay, this is a little plug for the webinar after the next one on rewilding. There's actually a whole section in there on rewilding the garden, setting the stage for nature to come back in your garden. That's what we've been talking about here. I will have a wide-ranging discussion of rewilding in this webinar. Okay, so this is the last slide. We can manage our suburban landscapes to reduce emissions, store carbon, and increase biodiversity, and save time and money at the same time. So I will be happy to take some questions. It's way past my time, and I'm sorry about that.